Chinese government has announced that doing any transactions in cryptocurrency is now illegal. Holding it, apparently you can still hold it, and this comes after Bitcoin servers being kicked out of the country. So yes, they've pushed the button. Go ahead, Balaji.
To Friedberg, I would say BitTorrent is what kept the record industry honest, and that kind of forced them to the table of iTunes. So to Chamath's point also, I wouldn't call it more evil, I'd call it more good. And BitTorrent also lurks out there as kind of this, peer-to-peer enforcer that it's a check, exactly. And it's not gone. And in fact, it's a basis for new technologies. And I think this is another flare-up. The other thing is that with crypto, the upside, even though the state wants to crack down on it harder, the upside is also greater, and the global internet is bigger. And so I think the rest of world, meaning all the world besides the US and China, is a huge player in what is to come. That's India, but it's also, Brazil. It's every other country that's not the US or China. And so that's a new player on the stage. And then third, to Chamath, to your point about, yes, China banned crypto, can the US do it? Well, what's interesting is people talk about China copying the US. Nowadays, actually, in many ways, especially on a policy front, the US is copying China without admitting it. But it does so poorly. For example, the lockdown. Okay. The Chinese lockdown, was something where it wasn't just sit in your rooms. It was something with like drones with thermometers and central quarantine where people were taken from their families and centrally quarantined, and 1,000 ultra intrusive measures that the population by and large complied with. I mean, forget about a vaccine mandate. We're talking about like, you can see all the videos and stuff from out of China. The government itself has published.
Yeah, they didn't seem real at first.
They didn't seem real at first, right?
Yeah.
And so, the thing is that for the US to follow that, it's a little bit like, as a mental image, imagine a lithe Chinese gymnast going and doing this whole gymnastics routine, and then a big, lumpy American following and not being able to do those same moves, right? The Chinese government, is, as I said, lawful evil, but they are set up to just snap this, snap that, do this, do that. The U.S. government is absolutely not, and the U.S. people are not. Whatever you do,
also
50%
our system is a democracy, is it not? Like, so you cannot just do that. Even if the government wanted to weld people into their homes, we have a democratic state here where we have to discuss these things, and there's a legal framework to it. So
yes,
it's not
but even
possible.
in the 1950s, the 1940s, 1930s, the U.S. was still a democracy, but it basically managed to exert a very strong top-down control on things. Today, we have something for a variety, like, under FDR or in the 50s, a very conformist society, which was able to kind of drive things through. Even though it's a democracy, it was something where mass media was so centralized that a relatively small group of people could get consensus among themselves. And then what they print in the headlines, I mean, who's going to go and figure out the facts on their own? This gets into the media topic later. So it's de facto centralized at the media level, the information production and dissemination level. And then you kind of manufactured consent from there. Today, you're combining that democratic aspect, the legal aspect, with a new information dissemination thing, which has destabilized, I think, a lot of things.
Sachs, what's your take?
Yeah, well, I'd love to get Balaji's take on an article that came out this week in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was a really important article. It came about 4 days ago, and it was entitled, Xi Jinping Aims to Rein in Chinese Capitalism and Hew to Mao's Socialist Vision. And the article describes how we've all seen and talked about on this pod how they've been cracking down on tech giants. They've been cutting down their tech oligarchs down to size, like Jack Ma, how he disappeared under house arrest. And, and we've seen that, they stopped the anti-IPO. But this article went beyond those steps and really talked about Xi's ideological vision. And what it basically says is that what's going on here isn't just the CCP consolidating power. They actually want to bring the country back to socialism. And what they say is that within the CCP, or at least Xi's view of it, capitalism was just something they did as an interim measure to catch up to the West. But ultimately, they are very serious about socialism. And, reading this article, I had to wonder, well, gee, did we just catch a lucky break here? In the sense that, look, if they're abandoning, or if they abandon the thing they copied from us, which is market-based capitalism, they use that to catch up. Maybe this is the way that actually, this is the thing that slows them down. And the thing that historically that it brought to mind is that if you go back into the 1500s and you compare Europe to China, the Chinese civilization was way ahead. I mean, the standard of living was way ahead. Technologically, it was way ahead. Europe was a bunch of squalid, warring, tribal nation states. And then what happened is a single Chinese emperor banned the shipbuilding industry. Any ship with more than 2 masts was banned. And so exploration just stopped in China. They became very inward facing. Whereas the European states explored and discovered and conquered the New World, colonized the world, and that led to an explosion of wealth and innovation. And as a result, Western Europe and then its sort of descendant, the United States, ended up essentially conquering and dominating the modern world. And so I guess, to bring it back to my question to Balaji, is there a chance that what Xi is doing, returning to socialism, could this be like the Chinese emperor who banned shipbuilding? Or am I reading way too much into this single Wall Street Journal story?
So my short answer on that is I think it is, I think the socialist thing is real, but I think it's better to call it nationalist socialism. With the implications that has. Right. Whereas I think the US is kind of going in the direction of what I'd call maybe socialist nationalism. Where it's like different emphases in terms of what is prioritized, but, and I think in many ways, China is like the new Nazi Germany, woke America is like the new Soviet Russia, and the decentralized center is going to be the new America. I can elaborate on that. But basically, with respect to this, one thing I try to do is I try to triangulate lots of stories. So rather than, for example, and nothing wrong with a Wall Street Journal, piece, like looking at it, but for every WSJ piece you read, it's useful to get what is CGTN or Global Times saying, even if you discount it just to see what they're saying. And then you also triangulate with, let's say, the Indian or Russian point of view. And by doing this, I feel that it's better than just reading 10 American articles. And, especially reading primary sources. Like there's this good site called Reading the Chinese Dream, which actually translates primary sources. And then you can kind of form your opinions from that versus like a quote hot take. Right? I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying that that's what I try to do. So
I think we've really gotten China right here. I mean, I think that if you look at what's happening, I think we've basically forecasted this orchestration of essentially the vertical integration of China. We have China Inc., where the CEO is Xi Jinping, and where there is it's almost like they've changed the game, where what they are playing essentially is like Settlers of Catan or something, where the goal is just to hoard resources. And I think that they have enough critical resources for the world. And the clever part of what they did was the last 20 or 30 years, they leveraged the world to essentially finance their ability to then have a stranglehold on these critical resources, whether it's chips or whether it's rare earths or other materials.
They leveled up.
And I think that was the genius.